Hey the people, how doing? So, today we have the videography comparison between the iPhone 12 and the Mi 11 Ultra. Now the photography comparisons were completed a little while back. I'll link the playlist in the description. Do check that out for all the details, but generally speaking, the Mi 11 Ultra is very competitive in terms of photography, but it has some inconsistencies. Now for videos, well, that is exactly what we're gonna find out today, so let's jump right in. Alright, so we're starting off with selfie video on both. Now, generally speaking, if this was just some random flagship we were comparing to the iPhone, I would have just said that 1080p 30 or 1080p 60 on the Mi 11 Ultra is not quite enough. We need more, obviously. A flagship should have 4K 30 selfie video, whether or not it's like typically used. In my case, I don't really use selfie video too much, but in this case there is some hope, because now I've noticed that we actually have this sort of closed beta happening wherein we can get the rear display on the Mi 11 Ultra to shoot selfie video along with a host of other features like portrait selfies, for example, with the rear cameras. So keeping that in mind, technically speaking, if those features actually make it to normal software updates, we could get probably the best possible selfie video from any smartphone. Yes, it's going to be very hard to frame with the rear display, it's small, but still I think that could be a great feature. And like considering the position it is in now in terms of selfie video compared to the iPhone or any other flagship which has good selfie video, I think then the position would be much better if the features make it, that is. I'm really hoping it does, by the way. So I think I just said everything that I wanted to right there, but regarding these videos here, I think the Mi 11 Ultra is overall quite good. I did turn on HDR mode, so that's why you can get really good dynamic range right there, very competitive with the iPhone. And the mic quality is also surprisingly good. I turned on frontal sound. I think that's why we could get such good overall audio, including noise reduction. It was really good across the board for the Mi 11 Ultra. And well, obviously the 1080p video recording is the only drawback here, and that's definitely quite an obvious standout. Also, if you're looking for colors, well, I'd say the iPhone is more flattering. It has saturated skin tones and so on, but the most natural looking overall rendition of colors would be the Mi 11 Ultra here actually. Now moving on, we have 4K 30 on both of these. Well, I'm actually surprised that the dynamic range on both of these are so very comparable. You can see the overall exposure balance and all that. It's very good on both, and in some cases actually I think the dynamic range was better on the Mi 11 Ultra, especially with regards to the highlight control. As for the ultra-wide camera, well, it's overall very similar, but you'll see I stumbled a little while walking in the beginning of the video, and there the iPhone obviously got destabilized in a manner of speaking, but the Mi 11 Ultra did not, which is kind of surprising if you ask me. But otherwise I think both are doing a great job. The colors, I do prefer the more saturated look on the Mi 11 Ultra. The iPhone obviously is going for a more neutral tone here. Now, there is an HDR mode that is built into the Mi 11 Ultra, which works only with the main cameras, and in this shot in particular, you'll notice that the dynamic range can be superior compared to the iPhone, which is quite something. You'll see that the shadows are better exposed in some cases, and that's really good. It looks really nice on the Mi 11, although the drawback is obviously that you can't use it with the ultra-wide. Now for versatility, well, this is where the Mi 11 Ultra takes somewhat of an upper hand, because we can actually get 5 times zoom with 4K video. Now 5 times with 4K, it's not going to be used all the time, but it's definitely nice to have. You can see we actually get to use a very smooth slider to zoom in and zoom out. Obviously the transition in quality will be visible. On the other hand, we have the iPhone. Well, the iPhone obviously just has a main and an ultra-wide camera, so obviously it's not gonna do much in terms of versatility. Now the Mi 11 Ultra also has quite an advantage in super steady, because as you can see the stabilization is quite a bit better. I'm obviously walking quite fast here and there's a lot of shake coming in, but regardless the Mi 11 Ultra is taking a huge win in stabilization. But what surprised me more than anything is that the dynamic range in some cases was actually better on the Mi 11 compared to the iPhone. The iPhone of course has much better detail preservation, that's kind of expected. Now we can also use the ultra-wide for even more stable video in a manner of speaking. I'm almost running in this case, and as you can see the ultra-wide is doing its job, but generally speaking, unless you want to run, use the main cameras, because that'll give you much superior quality even though it's both going to be 1080p. Moving on, we have 4K 60 on both of these, and Well, I gotta say both are doing a really good job. Now, I personally really like the colors on the Mi 11 Ultra here. It's maintaining a very natural look while also giving us a good amount of saturation. The iPhone, it looks just kind of a bit too washed out in my opinion, so I'm not a huge fan of that. But otherwise, both are doing a great job here. I think, generally speaking, it's gonna be a tie. Now, 4K 60 on the ultrawide is also essentially a similar story. Both have great stabilization, and dynamic range is also really good on both, so I have no complaints here. And this time actually the colors are not all that bad on the iPhone. They're still less saturated compared to the Mi 11 Ultra, but they're not that bad. Now for 8K video, well, only on the Mi 11 Ultra, as you'd expect, and there are two things that surprised me here quite a bit. Firstly is the stabilization. Just take a look at how good it is despite shooting in 8K. The details are obviously just fantastic, and we'll have a details test coming soon enough, but otherwise, take a look at the dynamic range. That is definitely quite something. It's actually better than the iPhone, especially in the highlights, which is not something I expected. Now we can also use 8K with the ultra-wide camera, and if you want the best possible stabilization while shooting really high quality 8K, this is the way to go. Although do keep in mind, we need a lot of light to really make things look good, especially preserving the details requires a good amount of light. So shooting in daylight with the ultrawide is, I think, the best way to do it. So it's been pretty nice and dandy for the Mi 11 Ultra. But there is an issue that we discovered while we were filming this part of the comparison. Now this is obviously more of a test for dynamic range, but as you can see that's pretty good, but the focusing is a huge problem on the Mi 11 Ultra. I'm not sure why it doesn't want to focus on Valentine, but that's just the case. And as you can see, the iPhone, I wasn't really focusing too much on the iPhone, but it does suffer a little here and there, but overall it's much better than the Mi 11 Ultra. Even using tap to focus, as you can see right here, it's still not quite as accurate or fast enough, especially when I'm moving back and forth. It's not really good. The focusing is definitely a problem here, but that actually changes in low light. We'll get to that in a moment. But before that we have the ultra-wide camera, and here as you can see it's very similar to before. The iPhone is going for a brighter look, while the Mi 11 Ultra goes for a more controlled look in a manner of speaking, in terms of the highlights of course. And the focusing this time with the ultra-wide, it's not perfect, but it's definitely a lot better compared to the main camera at least. Up next we have Dolby Vision on the iPhone 12. The Mi 11 Ultra has nothing as such. I wish it did, but that's not really the case. But otherwise, I gotta say, it looks great. This is transcoded in a SDR, so just imagine how good it would look when you're viewing it in proper Dolby Vision. By the way, the Mi 11 Ultra supports Dolby Vision, so it does look amazing on the Mi 11 Ultra. It's a pity the Mi 11 cannot capture Dolby Vision. Now finally we have low light video, and this is where I said that the focusing improved on the Mi 11 Ultra. Now I'm not sure if lighting was the real culprit, because it was backlit in the previous scenes and not so in this one, but that definitely seems to be the case. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. Also, if you'll notice, the Mi 11 Ultra has less noise and a little bit more detail, while the iPhone is actually doing a better job with colors this time around. Now overall I think the Mi 11 is a better choice for low light because it has a much larger sensor compared to the iPhone, so I would recommend going for the Mi 11 if low light video is something you're interested in. So now for the interesting part of this video, these are the detail tests. Basically we've used a tripod and now we're gonna crop right in. This is about 3.5 to 3.6 times crop, and as you can see, the detail levels are very similar on both. In good lighting, obviously that is gonna be the case, but I do think that the Mi 11 Ultra has more sharpness and also a little bit more over-sharpening artifacts compared to the iPhone. I mean, this is a huge crop, and given that we're shooting 4K 30 with the main cameras, it's kind of expected that the detail levels are going to be very similar across the board. These are both really good for video after all. Now for the ultra-wide, it's not going to be quite a similar story, because the moment we crop in, you'll notice that yes, the detail levels are very similar, but the amount of noise and also the noise reduction artifacts that you can see, it's definitely higher on the iPhone 12 compared to the Mi 11 Ultra. Overall, I think that's the major difference here. There is a bit more sharpening on the Mi 11 Ultra Like it's very hard to notice even at such a huge crop, so it's not really that big a deal. But definitely the higher amount of noise and artifacts, those are definitely noticeable. Of course, that is not where it ends for the Mi 11 Ultra, because now we have 8K, and so the moment we zoom in, you'll notice the huge difference in detail, and also the higher amount of noise and artifact that is present on the iPhone 12. It's quite surprising because generally what happens is 8K video usually leads to more noise while also more detail. That's definitely not the case here, although in the ultra wide that's what you're going to look at. We'll get to that in a moment, but just take a look at how much more detail is being preserved on the Mi 11 Ultra. 8K is definitely doing its job here. Now, as promised, 8K with the ultra wide, well, here the differences are quite minimal. I would say that both look almost exactly the same, with the only difference being that the Mi 11 Ultra has blown out a few more highlights. So I think the deciding factor here is the amount of light. I mentioned this before as well, but I think here the indoors lighting just wasn't quite sufficient enough to bring out the details of 8K. That's why we have so much more artifacting going on the Mi 11 Ultra this time around. So if you want to use 8K on the ultra wide, definitely use a lot of light. So pretty good details on the Mi 11 Ultra, especially on the ultra wide with 4K 30. It was doing a pretty good job there, and 8K is obviously fantastic. But where the iPhone does pull ahead is with night mode time lapse. Now, to be perfectly clear, both of these phones have 4K time lapses, but night mode is only present on the iPhone, and that does improve the video quality by a good amount. Like, it's very visible, the amount of noise that we can see on the Mi 11 Ultra, and we can also get some really nice looking trailing lights. I'm a huge fan of that, to be entirely honest. So yes, the iPhone does take a huge win here. Up next we have slow motion. Now 1080p 240 is obviously present on both, and they both look good, to be entirely honest. Now I would say that the iPhone is a bit weird here because it has this artifacting going on in the table. I've never actually seen that before, so that's weird to see. But even disregarding that, I think my preference would still go to the Mi 11 Ultra here, simply because it just looks better with higher contrast and more detail overall. So that's going to be my pick here. Now the Mi 11 Ultra also supports 1080p 1920 fps. That's right, you heard the number right. It is 1920, and capturing it can be ridiculously hard. Like, I ran out of soda while I was trying to capture it because the timing is so ridiculously tight, and so you're just gonna have to settle for the rising bubbles. I mean, to be honest, 1920 fps, it's really slow and very dramatic. Obviously that's the intended purpose, but like, at least from my own personal use case, I've noticed that slow motion is generally going to be limited to 1080p 240 because that is the best case for slow motion along with good quality. But something like 4K 120, which we get on the OnePlus 9 Pro, I've noticed that can be really nice as well, because you don't always need 240 fps, much less 1920 fps. So having the access to 4K quality, that can be really nice. So that closes out this comparison, and I gotta say, the Mi 11 Ultra was doing a really good job until the focusing issue showed up. Now, I think lighting had something to do with that, the fact that the entire scene was backlit by a studio light. I'm pretty sure that's why the focusing was completely thrown off the charts right there. But yeah, definitely the focusing, I'm pretty sure the focusing could use some improvements, but otherwise it's actually really good. Like, if you think about it, 4K 30, 4K 60 and 8K is really strong across the board, and I honestly have no other complaints. So yeah, I'm really happy that the Mi 11 Ultra is doing such a good job here. Obviously more comparisons are coming soon enough, so definitely hit the subscribe button if you're looking forward to those. Obviously drop a like if you enjoyed, and I'll be seeing you guys later. Cheers.